This is Talk with Dill, and today my guest is David Banks. He is a visiting assistant professor, geography and planning at University of Albany in SUNY. Member of Democratic Socialists of America, is he going to tell us why it is important to defund the police, amongst other things. How are you doing today, David?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. Thank you for coming on my show. Okay, so let's get started. 2020 has been kind of rough for Black and brown people. Let's just get right to it. So why should we defund the police and freeze the hiring process?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, right? So I'm going to give you some Troy numbers, but I bet significantly less money than the money we're about to talk about, that it's the same case, a very similar situation in just about every city in the United States. All right. So the Troy Police Department gets 28% of our budget. Right. So the $75.8 million budget that the mayor proposed for 2021, 41.6 million goes directly to the police department. That does not include 911 services. That does not include fire protection. That does not include traffic enforcement, like tolls or fines and fees. None of that is included in that 41.6 million. And to top it all off, that 41.6 million reflects a more than $700,000 increase from 2020. So we're throwing more money at the police department, and I would take some of the Republicans in the city at their word that crime is going up. Mm-hmm. Right? That if it were any other government agency, right, we would look at it and say, okay, well, if the point of the police department is to reduce or prevent crime, and crime is going up, what are they doing with a third of our money, right? Right. And so we have to start thinking more fundamentally, more critically about how we prevent crime, how we help communities heal after crime has been committed, and just generally, make Troy a safer, better place. The first half is because there's only so much money in the city, right? The first half is some money away from the police department, and then the part that gets me excited actually is then where does it go? And it can go to lots of really important stuff.
I've recently seen some militarizing the police. What would it entail for us to do that? And honestly, do you think that's such a completely good idea? And if so, why?
Okay. Yeah. So this is another really good question, right? Because it's complicated because in the United States we have a Second Amendment. People have a lot of guns, and you do have to think about, well, if the part of the government that is tasked with upholding laws, do they need to outgun the citizenry, right? That's one thing to think about, and there's no straightforward answer. The other part of it though is that this is kind of an arms race. Someone has to make the first step, and I think it would be fair for police to do that in some respects, or at least we have to start changing the conversation around what policing looks like, right? And so, for example, one thing that we at Troy DSA really want to focus on is the 1033 program. And what that is it's a federal program that basically acts as like the Big Lots of military gear. Right. So the federal government buys a bunch of, MRAPs, Hummers, utility trucks, guns, vests, all the whole nine yards. And whatever the military doesn't use, they sell to police departments at severely reduced costs. And sometimes, some slightly used stuff also gets offered to police departments at deep discount. Troy PD, we're not completely sure what they've procured through the 1033 program. It might not be much of anything, but they do, you do see them walking around Troy in Army fatigues.
Indeed.
With really big guns, and sometimes I can't say that that's never warranted, but it does say something about what you think about the people you're policing if you walk around like an occupying army.
Indeed. It seems as if they're scared of the community.
They're at best scared. At worst, I would say that they comes off as there are people that are to be protected, and then there are people that they are protecting those people from, right? Some people are the subjects of police violence, and some people are benefactors of police violence, you know, and that is that's a dynamic that I don't think can last.
Okay. So, you know, I want to touch upon that because I recently did see trucks in Troy twice, actually, at that. I was somewhere around Lansingburgh, and then recently I was like right before Lansingburgh, and I seen a truck. I was walking and I seen big old army trucks, and I'm just like, and I'm military brat, so I know what they look like instantly. So I was just like, what is that? I was like, what are they doing here? And it's like they're scaring the community, you know?
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, these trucks and gear are meant to be scary, right? Because it's for war, right? And part of war is at least scaring, humiliating your enemy, right? And showing a big, you know, shock and awe force. And that's what this material does. And if you want to talk about, you know, making the community heal or having a better relationship with the community that's policed, that I don't see these things as working together at all. They seem to work at opposite. You know, they work opposed to each other, right? Yeah.
Okay, so why do you think the police department keeps getting away with such destructive behaviors?
I mean, frankly, it's because there's no consequences for that bad behavior, right? So I'll give you a really disturbing example, right? So way back in 2010, 4 officers were sued by a man named James Foley. Foley was assaulted by 4 police officers: Christopher Polly, Charles Castle, Joseph McNall, and George Anderson. They punctured his right lung. They fractured his left ankle, among several other injuries. And Foley sued. And I believe we settled for an undisclosed amount of money, but you know, if it's anything like the ones that were disclosed, it's in the high 5 figures, right? $60,000 to $80,000, something like that, right? And that's your tax dollars, right? At least paying for the insurance plan that cities usually take out, expecting this to happen. Right. So part of this is like, you know, the whole system expects this to happen. This isn't it. There isn't something going wrong. This is business as usual. And what's business as usual in the Troy Police Department is that 3 of those 4 officers are not only still on the force, they've gotten raises. Right. So Polly makes over $77,000 a year, and so does McNall. And Castle is making a little over $67,000. These are all public. This is as of 2019, so they could be making more. And this is all public record, right? That they make this much money, and that is their job, is at least to be insulated from the consequences of puncturing someone's lung and fracturing their ankle. In 2013, the Times Union's Ken Crow wrote that Foley's attorneys had, quote, in their possession scores of complaints of misconduct against Troy police officers that were ignored, not investigated, or whitewashed by superiors who were deliberately indifferent to the rights of citizens they are hired to protect. That was Foley's attorneys stating that way back in 2013, and nothing has changed.
Now, what about, remember Patrick McMahon covering up that murder that happened, I want to say a couple years ago, I believe it was 2016. What are your thoughts on that?
It's business as usual again. And it pains me to say that, right, this is bipartisan, right? Republicans and Democrats do this. The cover-up of Edson Thevenon's murder by Randall French, right, is the one that you're referring to. I think it's a cover-up of a murder. I don't think it's much more complicated than that. There are reports stating that everything that the police department is saying did not happen, but the city of Troy does not want to see those released. As Troy DSA, we filed a FOIL request, a Freedom of Information Law request, to get these reports, specifically the Rinaldi memo that was supposed to reveal why actions were justified. That report is still secret, and even after I think we've asked for them 4 times, in addition to all the officers' disciplinary records, we've asked for all of these 4 times, and each time the city's council has said that they're just not ready to hand those over. And with the case of the Rinaldi memo, actually, they have declined its attorney privilege, that that this is a work from an attorney and therefore is not subject to the FOIL request.
To me, that says, they have a lot to cover up and a lot to hide. If you don't want to give out records, what's stopping you?
Yeah, they at least don't have a good answer to that accusation.
All right. So how would we as a community go about holding the Troy police accountable for misdeeds?
So we have a couple options, right? We can, one big one is that we need to have a civilian review board that has some teeth to it, right? Like has the ability to, for example, subpoena witnesses and officers, right? To bring them in front of a board, compel them to tell the truth under pain of perjury, and get to the bottom of like some really serious, disturbing events that have never been sufficiently studied, investigated, right? So that needs to happen, and I think that includes, something that isn't institutional, is more cultural, right? We need to start recognizing that the police department is just another part of city government, and that we can't. And that we should really consider it, frankly, something close to corruption, that our city council president is the aunt of the Police Benevolent Association president, right? So Carmela Montello, her nephew is Nicholas Laviano, right? The Troy Police Department PBA president. And like that, how can you ever expect her to hold them accountable?
Right.
If they're literally family.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's a problem.
It's a lot like that. Even where I'm from, because I'm not originally from the capital region, but where I'm from, everyone in the police department is literally related, or even the city. So if something was to happen, I'm pretty sure things like that happen all the time in my city as well. I just don't hear about it,
Yeah, a lot. There's plenty of stuff that we just haven't heard about, and in Troy, there's the case of Dominic Comital, who was as far as I know the only officer that been so publicly disinterested in ethics or the rule of law that they finally allowed him to resign. They didn't fire him; they allowed him to resign, and his family is known all over North Central as a particularly dangerous and disturbing family of police officers, is from what I heard. I'm not alleging that, but I've heard that.
Right. Okay. So what is the Right to Know Act bill?
Oh, that's a good question. So the right to act, it's several things, but it is essentially a bill that would require that police officers say more about who they are when you interact with them, right? Because quite often this was a case that happened to me, in fact, right? And I'm just a white guy, so like this is probably a best case scenario, right, for a lot of people, is that I took a photo of an officer outside the police department right before the June 7th rally.
Okay.
Right, that happened this year. We had 11,000 people out there. I took a picture. I was taking a picture of all over Troy just to get get the feeling, because I take photos. I have a nice camera, and I like to take photos of the calm before the storm,
the world.
Yeah, and the surroundings, just see what's going on. I took a picture of a police officer, and then I got in my car, and they immediately pulled me over. And they asked for my license and registration. They told me they took it back, and and by that time there were like about 3 squad cars around my car. They took my license and registration, didn't do anything, came back, said that I had gotten out of my parking space without signaling, which was why they pulled me over. They never gave me but they did repeat my address back to me. And they did try to take a photo of me with their cell while they were giving back my ID.
Is that illegal?
No. Right. And that's why the Right to Know Act is so important, because in that interaction, that officer would have to tell me his badge number, who he was, give me his card afterward, so that I could then perhaps go file a complaint saying that it really does seem that I was pulled over for no reason, or at least for taking a photograph of an officer. Right. And that taking a photograph of an officer while they're executing their duties in public, it was on a public street, that is perfectly illegal. Right. So the Right to Know Act would give people in my situation and worse, right, the ability to know who pulled them over, why, and give them recourse possibly if they want.
Now it's interesting they say they pulled you over because you didn't put your turn signal on, right? That's what it was, right? But you took a picture of an officer, and all of a sudden, you're pulled over. But the thing is, people record officers all the time when police brutality situations. I've seen them all the time. They just sit there, record them, and it's for their safety. They get the badge number inside the video as well. So, I definitely think that's a fishy situation with them. I feel like they definitely pulled you over because you took the picture and they seen you and they said, you know what, let's just go grab him real quick. Did they take the photo? They took the photo.
They weren't able to take any photos away from me, so they were on my SD card and everything.
Mhm.
No, they didn't take anything from me. I don't know what would stop them from doing that, to be honest. Right. Another thing, part of the Pass the Right to Know Act would be that sort of like the Miranda rights, where they say you have the right to remain silent, all that stuff.
Yeah.
This would also include something about searches, where you would have to be told that you have to give voluntary, knowing, and intelligent consent, is the phrase, to searches of the body or your property, such as your car, unless, of course, right, they have a warrant, right? That's of course the one thing that you need to search without that permission, right? But quite often, most a lot of searches just happen because it seems like an officer says, we need to search your car, right? And most people don't know you can say no to that. Right. And that's part of the thing, that you have a right to know.
Nice. Okay. So if we were to redirect funding to mental health, affordable housing, and social services, how would that help out the community?
Immensely is the short answer, right? So we have good evidence that suggests that most comes out of poverty and desperation, not out of, some cartoonish evil being that just wants to wreak mayhem. A good example of why that is, why we know that most crime comes out of poverty is actually in Utah, of all places, right? The liberal bastion of Utah, right? They tried a program to prevent veterans homelessness that was called Housing First. And this is a policy borrowed from several European countries tried this kind of stuff. And the idea is, the solution to homelessness, surprise, is to give someone a home. Right. And if you can give someone a home at no to very little cost, right, just start with the house. Yeah. And then people can start getting their life together.
Yeah.
If they just get the chance to have a stable address, a place to sleep, a place to store their food, right, to a place of quiet and privacy, right, all of these things are immeasurably important in preventing stuff like petty theft, break-ins, right, public indecency, right, public indecency, right, like if you are, if you need to pee, right, go find a place to pee downtown that you don't have to pay for it, right, you don't have to be a patron of something, right, it's impossible. And so if you want, and also littering, right? If you have some trash, right? If you don't live anywhere, right? It's always going out in public, right? So like all of these things get reduced or eliminated when you solve something as fundamental as homelessness, right? And in Utah, in the Salt Lake City region where they did this, they found like a 90% decrease, not only in homelessness, but in dozens of other quality of life issues, right? That everything got better when they did this. In fact, it got so good that it sort of ironically undermined the whole process, because property values shot up because it turned out to be such a nice place to live because there's no homelessness. People like living around a place where other people are doing well. And housing got so expensive that legislators thought that it was now costing the state too much to continue this program, and they cut it, and they ended up right where they started, right? And so we need to start thinking about how do we sustainably produce these sorts of programs that help people and actually get at the source of crime and social disunity, right? And it is poverty. It's not. These solutions aren't found at the bottom.
Okay, folks. Well, this was part one of a two-part segment with Mr. David Banks. He is a visiting assistant professor of geography and planning at the University of Albany and a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Thank you so much, David.